We are joined right now by Congressman Chip Roy of Texas. He voted yes on this bill after being one of the very big sticking points along the way with this. Congressman, thank you for joining us this morning. I just want to go back to where you were, 36 hours ago versus where you are this morning. Mm-hmm. On Tuesday evening, you were saying that you hadn't decided what you were doing. You said, we're in a better spot than we were a week ago. We're in a better spot than we were 48 hours ago, but there's still a lot of things we're ironing out. So what got ironed out to get you to yes?
Well, thanks for having me on. I mean, yeah, it was great to get the bill done. And by the way, I agree with my friend Warren Davidson, who makes very good points that there are far too much. There's too much spending and too many deficits in the near term in the front load and too much savings in the back load. He's correct. That's one of the things that I think the Senate ought to address. But we moved the needle a lot in the last 72 hours. We got pretty firm commitments yesterday from the White House in the form of legislative language to help the non-expansion states under Obamacare get some additional support to try to prevent the pressure on Texas and Tennessee and Florida to expand. I think that's bad for the country. So we got 110% plus up on the state-directed payments, which is important. We also got some commitments out of the White House to make some other changes that they might be taking some actions on at the executive level that we'll see, I think, in the coming weeks. And we were importantly able to make sure the Inflation Reduction Act had stringent requirements on construction. So within 60 days of enactment, if you're not constructing, you're not going to get subsidies. And at the back end on in-service. What that means is, in short speak, it tightens down the number of subsidies that could possibly go to any more of these plussed up wind and solar projects, which are making the grid less reliable. So those were all really big, important wins for us. I didn't get everything I wanted. I think there's some other stuff that I hope the Senate might address, both on deficits and on the Medicaid issue with all of the ridiculousness of the FMAP and provider tax games they play. That's a money laundering scheme that I think we can still improve. But we got a lot of work to do still in the Senate and to bounce back to the House, as Emily was talking about.
Right. If the Senate changes anything, the House has to vote again. And the Senate is not necessarily all that concerned about the very fine lines that you all have drawn. Where do you see push coming to shove here? What happens? What happens if the Senate changes it and it ends up spending more money than the bill the House just sent over?
Yeah, well, I think that would be a bad thing. I mean, again, I think if we learned anything from those guys in the so-called Salk caucus when they were pushing to have a higher cap on their high, to protect their high local tax and state tax jurisdictions, that we're going to be pretty strong on some red lines ourselves. The fiscal hawks saying, look, guys, don't come back and send us a bill that's going to ratchet up deficits. We can't have that. And by the way, I think the overriding governing principle ought to be watch the bond markets. Let's do our job to make sure that we can have the liquidity and the capital that we need and bond markets that are strong. We've been seeing a lot of issues in recent days. We saw the Moody's downgrade. Our nation needs to have fiscal discipline from its leadership so the bond markets can have faith that we'll have stable markets going forward. And I think that ought to be really governing everything we do. And most business leaders across the country should agree with that. We need good tax policy. We've done some of that in this bill, but we also need to have spending restraint. And that's been one of our governing principles here. My friend Jody Arrington, the Budget Committee chairman, those of us who created a structure in the budget to say, guys, we love tax cuts, but we're going to tie them to the spending cuts. The Senate better not break that deal because that was the deal that got us through the House. And we need to do even better. We need to, as I said, Warren's right. We can't have a front-loaded spending and front-loaded deficits and not have and then have the savings in the out years. We need to start at the beginning.
Yep. Hey, Congressman, you must constantly have to keep repeating yourself. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, because just listening to you talk about how we have made it a little bit harder for Texas and Florida to do the same thing that you're not reversing at all in all those other states. And I know that's what you'd like to do. And you have the presidency, the Senate, and the House. And already the reason you can't do more is because you're already worried. Some members are worried about 2 years from now. What's the Senate's problem? Those people have more time. They're going to dilute this probably even more. Why don't they have the intestinal fortitude to act like what Republicans are supposed to do with Medicaid and rein some of this? This bill coming back to you is probably going to be a nightmare.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Look, yeah, you're right. They have 6-year terms. They can afford to be bold. I think some of my good friends over there, like Mike Lee and Ron Johnson, Rick Scott, my former boss, Ted Cruz, my former boss, John Cornyn, those guys, I think, hopefully they'll all get together and start, tugging it to the right. And look, we've got to make sure the Senate does a good job. We did a good job getting it through the House. The Senate needs to keep that structure, but then make it better. And you alluded to the Medicaid situation here for Texas, right? And other non-expansion states. We need to do better than we did. We got a big win yesterday when we were at the White House, getting us to get 110% plus up for the non-expansion states on what's called state-directed payments. But we still haven't addressed the fundamental fraud, the scam that is the combination of the 90% FMAP along with the provider taxes, which for those, if you're watching this, you don't know what all that means. It's basically saying that we give 7 times more money for the able-bodied than the vulnerable. That's not President Trump's message. That's not what the American people want. So I think we can make those changes. We've been educating the Senate and the House during this process. The Senate's very interested in dealing with these issues. So we'll keep working on it. That's the way the process is supposed to work in a bicameral system like we have in this republic.
Congressman, it sounds like you took a page or two, you said, from the SALT caucus, where they held out and got what they wanted and refused to vote yes until they got to that point. It sounds like you are going to take that same sort of strong-arming when and if the Senate bill comes back.
Well, look, it's a combination of things. We didn't draw red lines on purpose because we didn't want to hamstring our leadership too much, but we did create a framework, and we were very strong in saying, guys, we need to address Medicaid. We need to address the Inflation Reduction Act. And you know what? We got a lot. We got a lot of really good stuff in that. So we will continue that way of doing things, but I do think we will draw a few red lines because we learned a little bit from the SALT caucus. They're like, look, guys, we're going to get our state and local tax or bust. And guess what? They got a $40,000 pop. That's $350 billion worth of cap increase. That's really expensive. I'm not so sure the Senate is going to just say thumbs up to that, right? The constituency in the Senate for the SALT caucus is not as strong as in the House. So we've got a lot of work to do in going back and forth. But in fairness to those guys, when it comes back to the Senate, we got to pass it through the House, too. So we all got to work together to make sure we deliver for the American people and for the president's agenda.
You mentioned I guess you would call it the yippiness of the bond market. This morning, the 10 years at 461, the 30 years at 514. Is that something that others in Congress are paying attention to at this moment? I mean, you've been that same fiscal hawkishness for a long time. It's a different thing when you have the bond market backing you up a little bit.
Well, I hate to say that I guess it's helpful that what we're seeing in the bond market at this current moment, it is a little helpful. Obviously, I want to see the bond markets get healthy and strong. But look, the bond markets are reacting. You cannot, and there are other forces, Japan, and there's a lot of things going on in the world. And if the president moves his agenda, I think you'll get some more stability in the markets. But we've got to demonstrate to the world that we're going to be responsible. And this bill, by the way, I got to be honest, we took a step, but man, we got a long ways to go. We're still going to have something like $56 trillion in debt. If we even do the House bill that has the spending restraint that we had to fight like, cats and dogs to even get over the last 3 months. Remember when the Republican leadership came out in like February, January, they were talking about, well, maybe we can cut $300 billion. Look, we got almost $1.6 trillion in spending restraint because some of us said, nope, that's not good enough. We're going to force everybody to the table. In my view, we should do better. And we should, as I said before, front load that spending restraint. But the bond markets, to answer your question, are very much front and center for leadership in this country. I think it should be more front and center for every member of Congress.